bass player from a small band called the Avery Brothers. So he is with the Avery Brothers, as everybody knows. Ben is a stand-up comic as well as a history professor at Middle Tennessee State University. So hopefully you guys get to check out the link to the podcast that I sent everybody. It has got some great shows on there. But this is our first official live feed podcast event ever. So thanks for coming, and I'm going to let them introduce their guests and get going.
Wonderful. Well, we're honored to be here. And that's the best ending to a story with Ben. It starts with Ben being in a pool that's ever happened. We're honored to have Bill Plante and Olivier Knox here as our guests. Bill, before retiring at the end of 2016, served 52 years as a journalist and correspondent for CBS News. He's covered virtually every major story of the last half century, including an interview with Dr. Martin Luther King on the Selma Bridge. It's amazing, and I advise everyone to look Bill up on YouTube because there's some great videos out there. He covered 5 consecutive presidencies, Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama, and he had a front row seat to history that's unmatched by anyone else alive. Olivier Knox is a veteran journalist who's written about U.S. politics and foreign policy for more than 2 decades. He's covered 6 presidential campaigns and has a deep knowledge of the inner workings of Capitol Hill and the White House. He recently became the president of the White House Correspondents Association. A good time to
Interesting
take over.
Time.
Yeah, that's a tough gig, buddy. He took over for our good friend Margaret Talib. Ben and I are very good friends with her. And he's immediately became in the crossfire. He's got a show every night on SiriusXM POTUS channel called The Big Picture. It's every night from 6 to 7. He's going to have to run out of here as soon as we're done to get over across town and do it. Thank you for making time to be with us, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
We want to start off with a question for you both because you've had long careers, you've covered a lot of different things, and our podcast is really about history and how kind of we got to where we are now. So the question I'm going to pose to both of you, and I'll start with Bill first. Take your first week on the job. How would that be fundamentally different or the same as a person starting their first week on the job as a journalist today?
Okay, in my case, extremely different. Well, I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Okay.
Whether it was the first week at CBS or whether it was some 20-odd years later, the first week I started covering the White House. But I had to learn quickly. But covering the White House, let's take the White House. Covering the White House then was very different than it is now. There were 2 deadlines a day, imagine that. You didn't have to tweet, you didn't have to go on Facebook, you didn't have to do a podcast, you didn't have to do a webcast, and now you have to do all that stuff, and there's no more time to think, which is one reason I'm glad I'm not doing it anymore, because it's a lot more work, to be perfectly honest. There were AMs and PMs, based at the time that I started at the White House, covering the White House, based on newspaper deadlines. The morning papers, the evening papers. 2 news cycles, they called them. Now there's a never-ending news cycle. So very different indeed.
Olivier, the same to you.
My first week on the job was mid-July of 1996. And a couple of days into my time at AFP was the TWA Flight 800 crash, which is the first big story I remember being attached to. I wasn't reporting on it myself. And what that meant for a wire service, so wire services have always had more than 2 deadlines, right? We're constantly filing. And I was on the desk, and one of my jobs was to follow everything on television. So when the officials would come out, we would have a reporter at the press conference, but I was sort of backstopping them. And a couple ways I think that would be different would be, one, wire services would have a lot more real-time competition because, as Bill has pointed out, everyone's filing like a wire now. Everyone's filing all the time. The other is there would obviously be a big I don't mean this in a derogatory way, there would be a big civilian component of the coverage with social media, because you might have someone who was, taking an iPhone movie of the night sky or whatever and saw this happen. And so those are two of the ways that would be very, very different.
Bill, I saw an interview with you recently, and you said that when you started covering the Reagan administration, maybe the first week they got into office, the press shop said, we're going to go over your heads. We're going to go over the press's heads. We're going to go right to the people.
Right.
But they didn't have the technology to do so.
That was Michael Deaver, who was Reagan's image guy, and who was a very accomplished image maker, ad guy, who said that to me actually before the inauguration. We're going to go over your heads. Well, at that time, it was the wire services, the Associated Press, United Press, that basically set the agenda every day for what was news. Because you would look at the wires and see what was at the top of the news summary on any given hour. And that was almost always what would lead the evening news and the next morning's paper, or that, so that was how you sort of determined what the news was. And now the news is what somebody thinks it is, or not.
So, Olivier, you had just taken over as the president of the White House Correspondents Association, and you had to defend Caitlin Collins from CNN, who was the poll reporter at the White House, and got barred from a White House event for, I guess, allegedly yelling questions to the president, which apparently is a new thing.
So, yes, she was barred from, on this topic, on this particular corner of this incident, everyone agrees, she was barred from what's called an open press event at the White House, which means that every other credentialed reporter on the campus at that moment was allowed into that event, and she was not. It was retaliation. The White House has tried to say that she wasn't barred because they didn't use the word bar. My response to that is, I'm totally not pushing you. I didn't say the word push. But there's some dispute about whether it was because they felt she was yelling too many questions. CNN says it was because of the content of her questions. I don't think that that's knowable. But yeah, every president, as far as I know, every president hates having questions shouted at them. In the very first Oval Office conversation between Barack Obama and Donald Trump, at the end of their statements, Obama leaned in and said something like, you don't have to answer their questions or something like that. They don't like getting yelled at, and these guys are very sensitive to that. And but the flip side is, anyone who's ever followed the rules, absolutely. And so when the president says thank you, in theory, we all start our process of walking out of the Oval Office. Every person over the last 18 months who has followed those rules has been punished because the president takes questions.
Right.
He might not take the first one, or the second one, or the third one, but he might take the fourth one. And if you're outside of the Oval Office, when he takes that fourth question, you are screwed. And they know this at the White House. They know this. They know that that's the big incentive, but they don't control the president, and so they're trying to shift the burden over to us.
Let me do a footnote there.
Yeah.
The president who actually enjoyed questions was Ronald Reagan, but the people who worked with Ronald Reagan did not enjoy having him questioned because they never knew exactly what he would say. So he liked coming up with answers on the fly because he trusted his instincts. And we would call out questions, and it would be as he was going to the helicopter, Mr. President, what about, fill in the blank. And occasionally, when he did this about twice a year, he would stop. He had an actor's grace. So he would stop and turn and face the camera, and he'd say, well, I don't know. Pause. They haven't told me yet. Making fun of himself. But I mean, what his handlers did was to move us further away. So he had a little hard of hearing too, so he couldn't hear us.
There's a great seminar or a great conversation on the White House Press Association, Correspondents Association website. And it's a conversation like this, and it's about the White House Press Corps' relationship with the presidency from Reagan to Trump. And Lou Cannon, the great Washington Post reporter, is a guest on that. And he says that there was a moment where everybody in the White House press shop got really mad at Sam Donaldson. And they were just trashing Sam Donaldson for the questions he was asking. And Reagan said, oh, he's just doing his job. Kind of stood up for him. it seems quite different, right? There's always pushback with the White House press shop against the press, but it's something different to call the press the enemy of the people or to deem them the opposition party. So Olivier, how are you, as the president of the White House Correspondents Association, going to stand up for the press doing its job, pressing the administration, but not be an opposition party, which that's not the press's job?
Yeah, you've zeroed in on a really important dynamic. I was talking to Bill about this earlier. One of my roles as I represent the nearly 400 members of the WHCA is I'm okay with the president being at war with the coverage. I'm not okay with him being at war with the reporters. In 2000, I was attacked by a supporter of Al Gore who threw my laptop into the beach sand at a rally. 2004, I had a Bush supporter spit on me, and I had a Kerry supporter throw batteries at me. Separate events. And I still divide the world into the pre and post February 17th, 2017, because when the President of the United States calls you the enemies of the American people, there are consequences. One of those consequences was really personal for me. I was driving my son to soccer practice a couple days after that, and he burst into tears, and he said, "Papa, is Donald Trump going to put you in prison?" What do you, I mean, I assured him he wouldn't, but it's meaningful. It has an impact. You know, everyone comes up to you like you just lost a loved one when that happens. You know, I heard what the president said. I'm sorry. But I'm okay with, again, I'm okay with a war on the coverage. Like he can be mad about the coverage. Every president's mad about the coverage. It's much more awkward when he's singling out individual reporters. I mean, I still have to pinch myself and think this is the President of the United States called a TV reporter a sleepy-eyed son of a bitch. It's weird. And I mean, the thing with Caitlin, I hope that they keep it as easy. You know, prohibiting an individual reporter from attending an open news event in retaliation for her asking questions is not a hard one. There are a lot of other harder issues. And frankly, some folks in our own profession don't make it super easy. We had a big to-do in press corps land when one of the outlets covering the White House said that the White House would halt the practice of readouts, which are these very brief, frequently detail-free summaries of a phone call between the President of the United States and another world leader. And this caused it to do, and my inbox overflowed with, you need to denounce this, you need to denounce this, you need to denounce this, this is an outrage, it's an attack on transparency, et cetera, et cetera. I looked at the story and started scratching my head because obviously not having an American version of the phone call means the foreign country dictates how that is covered. And I don't know if you just say the White House didn't dispute the account. I don't know what you do. So it's bad communications. And I reached out to a whole bunch of people at the White House and said, I need to understand what you're doing. And it came back basically, no, we're ending the traditional format of the readouts. The president doesn't like them. But what's going to happen is we're just going to start putting these things out in a note to the pool reporter, so the print reporter who represents the whole press corps at events. We're going to put it out in notes to the pool reporters, and they're going to forward it out. So it's a readout by another name. Right. But the knee-jerk response from a number of our members was, you know, you absolutely have to denounce this. And it's been a weird feature of the Trump presidency to have a lot of, this is unprecedented. Or you could ask someone who's been doing this for more than 20 minutes, and they can tell you, no, it's not unprecedented.
Right.
It doesn't help our cause to get up on our high horse whenever we feel that the First Amendment has been violated. Because first of all, most people's understanding of freedom of the press doesn't kind of come out in the same place that ours does. We generally believe that we should be free to say and write anything. The public isn't so much onto that. Too bad, but they're not. So when we get up on our high horse and say, well, as Olivier said, you have to protest this, it only makes it tougher.
So then how do you, I'm sorry, Ben, just
Oh,
one
no,
more. How do you perceive Twitter and social media and like Alex Jones and is there a line for hate speech, or is it the First Amendment protects it all?
There's a line for hate speech, I think, but the First Amendment generally protects just about everything. And it reminds me of something that I first heard in Vietnam years ago from a Marine officer who was in charge of the press at the Da Nang Press Center. There was a discussion going on. You guys don't really like us. We're a pain in the ass. And he said, you know what? He said, you're like the rain. We don't like it, but it happens, and we prepare for it all the time. I thought that was pretty apt.
So the